Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Brian Batko. Brian, we talked about the corners. Let's talk about these wide receivers now. I thought it was interesting that George Pickens, he talked early in the week right away he talked about how all he does is eat, live and sleep football. He sometimes pulls all-nighters, quote unquote, thinking about football. And this is a guy who, it's not a contract year, but it is a prove-it year because it's now his third season. The Steelers have gotten, on paper, better quarterback play. Quarterbacks on their roster. They got a new offensive coordinator that, maybe shouldn't hold him back as much. And so I do think this is a year where George Pickens has to prove it, or the Steelers are going to try to find other ways to find a number one wide receiver after this year, either drafting a guy high or signing a guy more expensive. But I do think it's interesting seeing him, and now he's working with Zach Azzanni, who when I talked to Calvin Austin, I asked him, like, hey, what's your first impression of Zach Azzanni? He's like, oh, he don't play. He doesn't take mediocrity. And he's like, and that's refreshing. And so I thought that was kind of interesting to hear that from them. And then also see how Zach Azzanni is right on it in practice. Like, George Pickens catches a pass. He's like right up in his face, like, go, 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 now. And he's forcing him to follow through. What has been your early impressions of how this receiving core has taken these challenges on?
Yeah, that was a pretty hilarious anecdote that George gave to our Jason Mackey about the all-nighters thinking about football. Do you ever pull all-nighters thinking about podcasting, Chris? Just
no,
how you can be better.
Thank God,
different
no.
ways you can. Yeah, me neither. But yeah, I as kind of funny as that was. I mean, I need to see the maturity from Pickens when it matters. I mean, that's all well and good to talk about it this time of year, and I do give him credit for, like you said, kind of getting up, front and center early on in the process, really as early as he could, because we know last year at times, some of his dealings with the media, the public facing George Pickens was not always where it needed to be, and Mike Tomlin even addressed that in the wake of the Colts lack of a block heard around the world. So
right,
you hope you don't see that anymore from him in year three. You hope he really is maturing and becoming somebody who gets it a little bit more. Maybe his new position coach, Zach Azzanni, will help that process along. I think George also needs to be somebody who can take coaching. We know he's a freakish talent. I've never doubted that. I've never, spoke ill about his ability. I think he can be one of the top 10 receivers in the NFL. I think they're going to force feed him the ball in a good way this year. I think Arthur Smith gets that and understands the receiving core he's coming into as a coach. But yeah, I'm going to need to see the growth sort of continue consistently in training camp, where at times he was a little bit of a distraction and you just sort of wondered, okay, is this going to carry over into the regular season with penalties and, the histrionics on the sideline? Spoiler alert, it did. And certainly once the games begin, and if things aren't going your way, if you are getting doubled, if you are drawing attention away and allowing Pat Freiermuth to get open and maybe catch more passes than you in a game, deal with that accordingly as long as you're winning. So Pickens is kind of an under the radar, I guess, a little bit guy at the moment, because he is safe and secure in his number one receiver spot. But obviously he does need to take a leap this year. And what will help him take a leap is if some of these other receivers can step up and draw a little bit more defensive attention in their own right.
Absolutely. And that's part of what needs to happen. I talked to Calvin Austin. He talked about how he worked on being sharper, being smarter at how he runs his routes, getting into his routes, in a better fashion. And how Zach Azzanni's pushing him to do that. And he's like, if I start something wrong, he lets me know immediately. And so that's helped him kind of push it there, and then you got guys like Quez Watkins, who caught a deep ball, on Thursday from Russell Wilson. I've been saying this. I think the Steelers, all these Quez Watkins, these Scott Millers, these Marquez Callaways, these guys that they signed.
I'm not slipping on Denzel Mims. Denzel Mims, I feel like is somebody who he's going to be like this year's Hakeem Butler in camp. Hopefully without all the drops. Without all the drops, but he's going to stand out physically. And it's tough waiting for a guy who was a second round pick and all the way back in 2020 to finally put it all together. Like the Bills are hoping for the same with Chase Claypool as the Steelers are hoping for with Denzel Mims. So I'm certainly not saying it's going to happen or they're banking on it by any means. But I mean, he is just another guy who I've kind of watched at times this week and said, I'm a little more bullish on the overall depth of this receiver group, even though, again, it'll look a lot better if somebody can seize the moment as the true number 2.
Certainly. And I think that's part of what the Steelers are assessing right now, with all these guys, like you said, Mims, and then, Watkins, Callaway, Miller, all these guys they've added. I think outside of I think Van Jefferson's a little bit higher than those guys. I think he's like the Allen Robinson of this year's team.
He is, but I feel like the upside's not really there so much with Van Jefferson. I feel like he's probably got the highest floor. He might be the safest. He's the most experienced. He's probably got the best understanding of this offense and how to help a quarterback. But I don't know. It's early in the process, but I feel like I've just noticed some of those other guys standing out a little bit more than Jefferson, but we'll see.
Well, yeah, we'll see. But my point is just that with all those guys there, I think the Steelers are looking to see, can we find something like a diamond in the rough here? Can we just get a hit on a guy who could have like one really good year so that maybe you don't have to trade for a wide receiver when you get into training camp and try to get another playmaker from another team? Because if you can get that one player who steps up in that regard, and who knows, maybe that's Calvin Austin. Maybe Calvin Austin just shows like, hey, I'm not just a slot small guy that's really fast. I can line up on the outside and I can make some plays as well. But I think the thing is, the Steelers, they want to see if they can find some guy without paying to go get that guy, whether it was draft capital or free agency money. And
maybe it's Roman Wilson too. Calvin Austin and Scotty Miller are they're all on the smaller side for sure. That's a natural challenge they're going to have to overcome in the NFL. Miller has overcome it at times to be productive. He's been a deep threat. He said this week that he still feels like if he's able to make this team, that'll be his role as somebody stretching the field, and good to play with guys like Russell Wilson and Justin Fields with big arms who can help him, help the team. So they do have a lot of options there. It's going to be kind of tough to pick a 5 or 6 to make the team. It's just that, you need somebody to be the ideal complementary piece, because I don't think you're going to piecemeal it with a bunch of different formations and packages. I mean, Calvin's somebody you might have to be creative with to get the most out of him. I don't know that he'll ever be a traditional receiver at his size at the NFL level, but he's obviously he's working his tail off to try to do that, and I think he has more versatility than people give him credit for. You can line him up on the outside and have him run a go, take the top off the defense, or I think you can put him in the slot, use his quickness and his burst to be a mismatch. So that's going to be a puzzle that's going to take a while to play itself out, because we just ran through all the names of everybody who's kind of in the mix. And none of them give you huge number 2 receiver vibes just yet, but that's what the team development process is all about, as Mike Tomlin would say.
Absolutely. We'll keep you up to date on all things OTAs. With the Steelers next week. We will be off for Monday with the holiday, but we will be back Wednesday, and the Steelers will be back Tuesday for OTAs. We'll be keeping you up to date with all of that, but in between then, read all the work we got at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette by going to post-gazette.com. Brian, thank you for joining me here on the show. Thank you all for joining us here on the show. We hope you have a great holiday weekend. I hope you enjoy some fun times either out in the Berg or wherever you are listening to this podcast. Remember to subscribe to this podcast, whether it's on your favorite podcasting app or on YouTube. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you again Wednesday here on the North Shore Drive Podcast. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive Podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.